because of the commitment that has been in place for years, I don't think it's as simple as just all the police officers walk away. I think there has to be some very discerning and strategic conversation about what the next steps could be and what they can be. And I don't think that we're there yet, but I do think, and I will say here in Wake County, that the role of the SRO has evolved significantly from where it was in the late 80s, early 90s, because I do remember when SROs began in the school system here and what their roles were. And I think that they have evolved over time. And I know that several years ago, the Wake County school system, along with the various law enforcement agencies throughout Wake County, really took a hard look at what the roles were and more clearly defined the role of the SRO versus the role of the school administrator and other staff to make sure that officers were not leaning into those functions that should clearly be handled by school administrators and other staff, and vice versa. And so I know that there's been some considerable work, but I also know that there's some conversation that's on the table now as to what the future will look like. We also have to evaluate where is the greatest value in ensuring that the needs of the students are met, the needs of the school system are met, and of the police department or that law enforcement agency. It's hard to say what they will and can do, because even now SROs have, while they have security functions in schools, some SROs engage in very different ways at the schools. And so here's that opportunity to really evaluate that as well. Safety has to be a priority, but I can also remember when we didn't have SROs in the schools at all. And then we got to that place. So, here is that time to hear the voices, here's that time to evaluate, but it's also an opportunity to just really prioritize what are the things that have to be at the top of that list, among other things. And I think safety rises to the top in probably many of those discussions that either have been or will come down the road. It doesn't necessarily mean that safety has to be provided by the Raleigh Police Department or by any municipal law enforcement agency. Change takes place in an ongoing, continuous process, and I think it's important too that we just don't assume that change never took place before the incidents involving Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis. This is a very progressive police department. And so when you talk about, for instance, policy, what we've done is we've even gone back and reevaluated certain policies. We know that there was an issue clearly, and we too took issue to the death of Mr. Floyd. And when you look at chokeholds and conversations around chokeholds, we already had a policy that spoke to chokeholds and not using them. So what we did was we even changed our policy so that it is written as such that we banned chokeholds. The policy review evaluations, that type of process has to happen in a department our size so that we can recognize the best practices that are out there. Do we always get it right? We don't. Do we learn from those experiences? We should. And that is what I would expect as the chief. When we talk about building relationships have to be fostered prior to the crisis. It's harder to try and build a relationship in the middle of the crisis. Do we have relationships fostered throughout our city? Absolutely, we do. Are they fragile in some spaces? They are. And it's even more important that we work even harder to build those relationships now when we talk about change. But over the course of years, um, our department has held events like Face to Face, where we held meetings throughout the city well before COVID, where we were building those relationships and sitting at the table with individuals and having conversations with them, letting them see and talk to me as an officer and letting me hear your voice as a resident here in our city, and walking away with things that we have changed and been able to change. An example is consent searches. We changed policy, met with community because we listened. So the change, the process, the engagement can't just start now. We still have to do that. And amid COVID, we still have to do it. And as we seek, um, those opportunities to further that relationship, if we let COVID take absolute control, even this meeting right here wouldn't happen. As we evaluate what future patrol could look like, we look at a lot of things. But imagine you being in need for an officer in the Southeast District, and I've got to get somebody to come way out almost by the airport to get to you at 5 o'clock in the afternoon during rush hour traffic. So you put them in a place geographically, you position those stations so that there is so that you can, as efficiently as possible. And sometimes it's even more challenging when you have traffic in a growing city like we have. But you try to strategically place them in that geography so that they can respond in the most efficient possible way to answer those calls for service. So, and as the city grows, at some point we may have to even evaluate adding to that number, which would probably mean that you would redivide the district lines at some point because they're growing. And you want to make sure that you meet demands. And we have, while we say we have, a growing city, there are some areas that are growing and populating a lot quicker than others. So you want to make sure that you have the adequate number of resources to meet the demands of that growing area as well.